this is such a delight for me to get to interview Sara Sliger about her debut novel, Take Me Apart, which we will be talking about in all its glorious detail. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about Sara, and I will give you two versions of this bio. We'll start with the one that's the official bio on the inside of the book. Sara Sliger is an author and academic based in Los Angeles, where she teaches English and creative writing as a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Southern California. She holds a PhD in English from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's in history from the University of Cambridge. Take Me Apart is her first novel. Does that seem pretty accurate, Sara?
That seems very accurate.
Good, because I'm not done. I will give you a little personal background on Sara and how we know each other. Sara was a member of Mr. Gad's House of Improv, where I was also a member at Amherst. I still remember Sara's audition for the improv troupe, in which she played I think it was a cigarette-smoking French woman with a pitch-perfect accent. Obviously, we unanimously let her into the group. And then I also, in preparing for this interview, I actually had a little fun digging through the Gad's archives, in which I found during a Gad's murder mystery, Sara played. It's like the riches of this were delightful to me. She played a romance novelist named Irma G. Wergensloot, whose pen name was Capricia Carlyle. I would just like to say that here we are years later. Now, am I interviewing Capricia Carlyle? In a sense, yes, I am. But here we took, Sara was this romance novelist from way back when, and now she has parlayed her fictional self into a writer of a suspense, thriller, mystery, little dash of romance, literary fiction marvel.
That's so sweet. That was a lovely biography. Thank you.
Well, and I'll give this too. This is on a more personal note. Sara and I have had an email correspondence that spanned almost a decade and a half.
Also horrifying.
But a great boon to me, a support emotionally and mentally. And I feel like some of the weirdest, most difficult years of my life, you have been there supporting me and sharing your words, right? Which is so what it is to be a writer. Sara's both incredibly brilliant and perceptive about human nature, which is, I think she's so sophisticated as a writer and thinker. She can sort of look at situations and understand why people do the things they do. And then she's also so emotionally bold and vulnerable with what she's going through and raw. So you might say she is both sophisticated and raw, which, watch this segue, leads me to some of the many, many rave reviews for Take Me Apart. The esteemed Kirkus reviews, which is like the creme de la creme of the trade reviews for fiction, for any books really. They called this novel spellbinding, a raw, sophisticated debut. It has received a lot of attention and so many rave reviews. It was a May 2020 Indie Next Pick. It was People Magazine's Best Books of Summer. It was Amazon Best Books of May. And if I may add my own rave review, I read this book in one sitting on a plane from Ohio to Los Angeles, and I just was like this ravenous gulp. I just swallowed the entire thing. It's about so many things that matter to me, and I think that matter, period. Art, femininity, motherhood, misogyny, violence, mental illness, the sacrifices we make as women who create things, or even just women who are trying to live in the world. It's sexy, it's serious, it's playful, it's wry, it's so artfully done. And it's absolutely one of my picks for all of 2020. My goal is to make Sara cry. I will read you the flap copy of the book so that you lovely listeners get a little peek at why I love this book so much. And we'll dive into the nitty gritty and we'll talk more about Sara. I want to hear about both this novel and the sort of specifics around writing it. And just, I also love to talk about craft. And I think we've obviously logged many hours, not on this interview, talking about writing and being a writer. So we'll get into all of that. But for now, let me read the description, the blurb of Take Me Apart. A young archivist's obsession with her subject's mysterious death threatens to destroy her fragile grasp on sanity in a riveting debut novel of psychological suspense. When famed photographer Miranda Brand died mysteriously at the height of her career, it sent shockwaves through Colinas, California. Decades later, old wounds are reopened when her son Theo hires ex-journalist Kate Aitken to create an archive of his mother's work. From Miranda's vast maze of personal effects, Kate pieces together a portrait of a vibrant artist buckling under the pressures of ambition, motherhood, and marriage. As the summer progresses, Kate navigates vicious local rumors and her growing attraction to the enigmatic Theo, all while unearthing the shocking details of Miranda's private life. But Kate has secrets of her own, and when she stumbles across a diary that may finally solve the mystery of Miranda's death, her curiosity starts to spiral into a dangerous obsession. With breathtaking and haunting imagery, Take Me Apart paints a vivid picture of two magnetic young women, separated by years, but bonded by shared struggles. Sara Sliger draws readers into a web of secrets and lies, alternating between the present and past and revealing the truth about Miranda's death through the objects she left behind. A brilliant take on art, illness, and power from a fresh, seductive new voice in suspense. Sara, I would like to give you a moment to reflect and tell me how you feel about my very long-winded introduction. Have I left anything out?
Yes, I think we've left out an introduction of you, so I'm just going to jump on board and put in my own introduction of Bree here, which is that Bree is also an author, also very accomplished author of very wonderful books. You are right now, I guess you finished the third in your trilogy?
I have actually, yeah, it comes out in January.
Okay, great. So I'll start over. Bree is the accomplished author of soon to be 3 books. Currently 2 are published. One is called Heart of Thorns and one is called Tears of Frost. And it's part of this young adult trilogy that will have so many resonances and interest to people who don't normally read young adult. It's like this fantasy adventure, but it's also about family and memory and connections and women's experiences with violence. And it's just a magical little series. And I also just wanted to add to Bree's, reminiscence about our email correspondence that anybody who's an email correspondent with Bree can tell you that she writes the most beautifully structured, long, thoughtful emails.
Wow.
Anyone else would spend 4 days crafting the kind of email that Bree sends in 20 minutes. So it's actually really a gift on my end to be able to receive emails from Bree. Anyway, I just wanted to pop that in there.
Thank you.
And
I feel like I thank you. That means so much to me. I also feel like this is a true celebrity interview now because you, as any good celebrity, have found a way to turn the questions back on the questioner. Also feel like there's something our old advisor and professor Andy Parker would be so pleased with us right now, like the nuances of who's questioning the questions. So I think we're already at Amherst top speed.
well observed. I know. Also, I will say that our chattiness is perhaps already taking the reader away, but it's just a testament to the wonderful friendships formed at Amherst College.
And I think it's interesting because we'll talk about this in a moment, but I think we are interested in some of the same themes in person. In real life and in fictional life. I think it is interesting that we both gravitated to stories that investigated violence, right? Violence against women and what it is to be a woman in these sort of different worlds and situations in which we find ourselves. So on that note, we'll dive right in. So many things I want to get into because there's just so much about this book that I love. I'm going to start with my twist on the question that you've probably been asked 212 times, which is, of course, where did you get the idea for the book, right? When did inspiration seize you? I'll try to ask this in a fresh way so you get to craft a slightly different answer. I'm curious with this book if there was the glint of inspiration, right? The aha moment, the eureka, which I think we hear about, or we want to believe that's books come like that, like almost like fully formed, right? Poof, they're in our brain. Or was this a sort of slower unfolding and unpacking, I guess, or shall we say an archiving of different themes and ideas that were interesting to you?
Oh, well, that is a good way to ask it, because I don't really remember or have like a specific eureka moment about the book. I think the earliest sort of thinking that I had about it was knowing what kind of book I wanted to write, the sort of tone and atmosphere of this setting. It's set in Northern California, and that sort of backdrop plays, I think, for me at least, a big role in the kinds of spookiness and suspense that like develop in the book. And that kind of came to me early on, you know, so I sort of knew the sort of genre and feel of the book and some of the imagery that I wanted to use. And the different elements of it fell into place, you know, some quite quickly. Like from the beginning, there was also this emphasis on the archives and the idea of like telling some of the story through Miranda, the photographer's documents, letters, journal entries, medical records. So that was there really early on. But so, you know, some of the details are more thematic. Other sort of like thematic reaches just came through the course of writing it at different stages. I definitely would say it's a book that had a lot of rewrites and was not, I did not fully conceptualize it before working on it. And so it grew a lot through the process of writing.
It's so funny. It's like in answering that, you almost touched on every single one of my additional 9 questions. So, but that's okay, because I'm going to get you to delve in deeper on each one. Something you said is actually interesting to me, the sense of place, which does really permeate the novel. And I think that's an interesting place to start, right? I feel like we hear a lot about authors who there was a character, right? You know, like someone started talking in their heads. I still remember saying sometime like, yeah, I just hear voices in my head as a writer, and thinking, wow, say that in your therapist's office, and that really means something different. But, you know, we hear that, and then obviously, you know, events can in fact impact or sort of give you an origin for a novel. But it is like the place of this book is so powerful, and it is, you know, it's shrouded in the fog of Northern California, right? And so much of Kate's journey is like trying to push that fog away and see what really happened to Miranda. I know you spent a semester at Stanford, or was it?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, a semester. So tell me how that impacted, like, what is it about being in that place that kind of captured your imagination, and probably even as far back as then planted some seeds of what would become this novel?
Yeah, I think that I spent a semester at Stanford as like part of my sort of graduate studies, and that was kind of my first like experience with California and going to California, and it was this kind of like magical world to me. If I'd never been here before, I now live in Los Angeles like Bree, but I'd never been to wait, did you freeze again, or oh no, you're just sitting
I'm
really still.
listening to you, I'm wrapped, and so I'm just
Okay, sorry. Okay, anyway, so I did this semester at Stanford as part of my graduate studies and had this kind of first experience coming to California. And I just was like so taken with it. It was so different to me than the places I lived before. I grew up in central Illinois, which is like not the most romantic of settings, I would say, generally speaking. And then, you know, went to Amherst, which is in a really magical romantic setting, but in a very different kind of feel, kind of way. And, you know, I just was like very drawn to California as this idea of like a place people go to reinvent themselves, which I do think is kind of like a cliche in popular culture. I was interested in exploring that. And I also was just like so obsessed with the beauty of the state that, you know, I think like being sort of obsessed with something is a good place to go into something creatively, like really wanting to figure out how to conjure and understand that and create that, the feeling of being there. So I think that was, yeah, that was like why I was so interested in writing a novel set in this area.
It's such a good art imitating life, imitating art piece too, because right, obsession plays such a key part in this book, right? Certainly as Kate sort of increasingly obsessed with Miranda and really implicating herself into Miranda's literal house, her son, right? Her objects, her documents. So I think that's so great that the obsession really got reflected too in the place. And now I'm sitting here thinking, wow, as we're talking about the magic of Northern California and California, it's burning around us.
Yeah, I know. I was thinking about that too. It's
Yeah.
it's it's really sad. I mean, and there was also, there have been terrible wildfires in Northern California for a few years in a row now, and these this year are already, historic, and it's devastating. It's so sad to see so much kind of natural beauty just consumed so quickly.
Mm-hmm. Consumed. Yeah, it's like imagining Kate's aunt getting evacuated from her like beautiful little town up there. Yeah, let's hope
There
life
is
doesn't
a
imitate
point, the
art.
wildfires do come up really briefly at one point in the book, kind of as this like external thing happening. Um, and I don't know if I don't, remember if this ended up in the final version or not, but I did sort of, I was interested in thinking, I guess, about how the different characters would react to the sort of idea of wildfires in the kind of general vicinity, not directly threatening them, but the sort of different actions they would
Yeah,
take. Because I
right.
do think that it is, something that living in California, you think about a lot.
Yeah, right. In a way that, yeah, I lived people in other, like you in Illinois, you weren't thinking about it probably ever or in the same way.
Yeah, we had tornadoes there, but
Yeah,
no
same being
wildfires.
from Texas, right? That's the real threat. Great. Tell me about. We'll go back to the longer version of the Kirkus Review, which is Sliger delivers an intriguing mystery while tackling big themes, especially sexism and societal restraints placed on women's bodies and mind. I think that's absolutely true, and it's something that I love about the book. Tell me about, I mean, did you feel intimidated to tackle big themes, right? Like this is really juicy, meaty stuff, sexism, misogyny, women's bodies and minds. I mean, in a sense, I feel like when you write about big themes like that, you become an ambassador, whether you want to be one or not, of those themes. What has that experience been like? Were you nervous, right, tackling these sort of big themes, or were you like, let's dig in, I am ready?
I guess I would say maybe a combination. I think that there's, a sense of throughout, like writing about the theme or starting to embark on that, just a sense of like, well, like, who am I to sort of like make a statement about this? But, and it can be hard feeling like you need to create a sort of fictional representation of something very complex, and fictional representations are always going to be like, a couple characters' experiences, not everyone's experiences. And so kind of thinking through how to make those experiences representative of the characters and true for the characters, without sort of like sealing off, other people's sort of real experiences with some of those. So it definitely is something that, I found daunting and have thought a lot about and think a lot about. But I think it's kind of, similar to the sort of obsession with the place that, these are issues that that really interest me. And, so like one of the big themes in the book is Miranda, who's this like really famous photographer, and basically the pressure that society puts on her to like not only be seen as a brilliant artist, but also a good mother and sort of fulfilling certain expectations of women. And I think this is a really interesting question. It's a double bind that a lot of women have experienced through history, and that has shaped a lot of the reception of female artists. And so it's just something that has interested me for a long time. Whenever I sort of read about female artists or authors and sort of think through that, I'm not a mother, but I do think that kind of that sort of like those contradictory expectations are true for a lot of women who are creative. And so it just felt like that was sort of like the meat, or one of the parts of the meat of what I wanted to like really write about, one of the things I was trying to kind of figure out through writing. And so not writing about it, just because it feels like scary or overwhelming doesn't, that seems like something to sort of push through. But I also think, I guess, as you're saying, I think it's important to think about, and unfortunately probably like worrying about it is a good sign. It's like worry and anxiety is not pleasant, but I also think, if you're going to address these really these complicated topics that real people struggle with, then it is something that you have to give a lot of thought to.
And that's so clear. I think I think you're so thorough and you're so thoughtful in the way you treat those, big meaty themes. And actually, yeah, I'm glad you said that you brought up motherhood, because obviously I know you, have known you for a while. Unless you're hiding a kid, I was pretty sure you didn't have one. We're both women makers, artists, writers in our 30s without kids. I was just blown away by how beautifully you captured, I think, that dilemma. I mean, I was pretty astonished by it. I thought maybe Sara has had a kid I didn't know about,
a secret one.
I knew you had a secret one. They're in that like back office behind your house in LA. Yeah, I mean, I just thought, actually, I would love to hear how female artists with children who've read, or anyone, let's say, with children have read and responded to this book, because I was just blown away by how well you articulated and were able to really crawl inside that dilemma that at least my mother artist friends feel. I mean, because I just think and I guess I'm not one myself, so what do I know? But I just was blown away by how well you inhabited that space, not being in that space yourself.
Thank you. That's so lovely. I mean, I don't know. I don't know really. I did a lot of research, a lot of reading about these different experiences. I have friends who are mothers and have children. My own mom is not an artist, she's a scientist, but her career has been really important to her for my entire life. And so I think, there's sort of like issues that I had thought through before, but I don't know. I mean, it's hard to answer the question like, oh, like, how did you do something well?
I know that's
like,
I don't know. I even ask it like that way, because I feel like it's like, how did you do that as a writer? How did you inhabit that character? It's like, well, that's sort of what writing is.
No, but I mean, it's a good question though. I think ultimately it got truer the more specific it became, to the character. And Miranda also is such like a unique and specific sort of personality that there was like a freedom to like imagining how she would react to things, because she's just like she's an extremely sort of like forthright, decisive type of person. And so imagining how she would react to like certain situations, once I got kind of like inside her mind, was not I mean, it was challenging, but it felt possible. Mm-hmm. I do think that I have heard from some readers who experienced postpartum depression and were sort of like coming out of that, and wrote me and said that they felt it was like a really truthful account, and that was just like, that was really meaningful and has been really meaningful to me, because I think that was an experience that I wanted to be honest about without having experienced it, if that makes sense. It's like a very writerly thing, this like desire to like this like striving for honesty about something that is like also kind of a lie because it's fiction. Right. But that's how I guess it feels to me.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, as someone who has certainly struggled, the right word, it's definitely a quandary in my life. Do I want children? Do I not? How would I balance it with my art? Would it kill my art? Would it improve my art? Would I be more productive with my time if I actually had less of it? It's like all those questions are very alive to me. And and reading your book was really, I mean, it stirred a lot of those questions and dilemmas in my own life and heart. And, you know, it's like, in some ways it made me feel like I could do this. And in some ways I was like, this is terrifying. Maybe I don't want to do this, but you know, it's like any good fiction, I think it can, you see your own struggles and questions and concerns and dilemmas reflected in the words, right? It reflected in this fictional person in this fictional story. And I think that's such a hats off to you, because it's such a testament that you can make these characters breathe and speak to me and something that I wrestle with in my own life. So yeah, kudos to you on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that also, like, you know, most women who have like a specific sort of passion or career and are go through, you know, their 20s and 30s, have that experience of like of this like debating about it, of like the kind of being pulled in opposite directions. I mean, not all women, obviously, but if you are a woman who like has a career and also has like at some point wanted children, it's a lot of competing pressures. And
Yeah.
that's something I was very familiar with. And it was sort of like an experiment. And like, well, what if, you know, this thing happened, this part of
Mm-hmm.
that.
Yeah, one of my friends said to me recently, it's loss either way, right? You give up things either way. And for some reason I found that so comforting, you know, that it's like there are gains and losses either way. And it was really helpful to think about it in that sense. You talked about Miranda Brand, right? One of your sort of two main characters, and how freeing it was to write her. And I'd love you to talk more about that. I'm just going to read. I think this has long been the first line, or it's like structurally now it's not quite the first line, but it's been an early piece, and it's always been sort of Miranda Brand's first line. Hal is her manager, her dealer. What's that really
Yeah.
called?
Yes. Yeah. Her art dealer.
Okay, so this
Yeah.
is Miranda. I'll just read you the first, listeners. I'll read you the first couple of lines of Miranda's letter to Hal, her art dealer. So this is one of the archival documents that Kate, you know, is collecting. This is from 1990, Miranda's letter. Dear Hal, thanks so much for the invitation to write a confessional essay. I will have to respectfully decline. Here's why, you fucking tool. Drop the mic. So, and that's just like a sample of the kind of fabulous voice of Miranda Brand, which really just grabs you by the throat and sort of never stops the whole book. Tell me about, because, you know, I know you're incredibly bold, and, you know, I feel like you're good at confrontation in a way that I could never be, but you're also like listen to your voice. You're like gentle, you're thoughtful, you're academic, right? You have like a sweet, quiet voice, and like, you know, I don't think it's hard to imagine you like going in and punching someone, whereas I can kind of imagine Miranda going in and punching someone. So was that really freeing to sort of inhabit this like balls to the wall, fuck you tool character?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was, you know, a kind of experiment in expressing anger in a different way than, you know, I would normally express it. And the thing also, you know, about Miranda as a character is like she's very angry. I think that, you know, in real life, she would be like pretty unpleasant to know in a lot of ways, but
I'm
she's
scared
like
of her.
wonderful to know in the context of like of fiction, because you know you don't have to like actually interact with her every day, and like her dismissal of certain people is not like a reaction to you or anything, you know. And so and like also we're going inside her head, so we can have like a lot of empathy for her. So it was sort of like, you know, it was I don't know that I would say that I was like, oh yes, like through writing Miranda I was able to like become angrier in my personal life, because I don't, you know, she's a fictional character. I don't know if that would be really, you know, feasible or desirable. But I do think that's really true, and I think that it, you know, her voice kind of came from like some sort of well of anger, or some sort of like, oh, you know, if I really didn't care what certain people thought, like what
Mm-hmm.
would, you know, my instinct be in certain situations, if I wasn't at all afraid of like people not liking me. And I think that part of it for Miranda is that she is successful at a very, very young age, like really kind of right out the gate. And so she knows really early on that she has something that people really need, or because her art is very successful, she's making a lot of money, and so she knows, in writing that to her manager, that her manager is not going to like leave her, for example.
Right.
So that gives her like a kind of power that is like maybe a little bit of like wish fulfillment. But yeah, Miranda was fun to write. That line has been in there for many, many drafts, even through a lot of other changes. And her voice is probably one of the things that stayed most consistent throughout different kinds of plot changes. Kate's voice, the other narrator, changed a lot, but Miranda's was always kind of maybe one of the touchstones of the book.
Yeah, it does. It feels like the backbone. I remember reading several drafts ago, right? And it was like just as vivid then as it is now.
I think my editor also has told me that that was like a line that like "you fucking tool" line was also one where she was like reading the manuscript and she was like, oh, like now I'm like, I
yeah,
really want to keep reading. And so I
yeah,
think that yeah, your reaction to that line is something that I've heard before and I really enjoy.
yeah, yeah. It's so fun, and I think something you were saying sparked my thought that Miranda, she does come out of the gate with so much potency, right? And I think it's so interesting as we watch through these archival documents, right? Get older and more savvy and understand the ways that that potency, that power that she came out of the gate with, is being used and exploited and sort of mined for money, right? By Hal, or that like that was so deftly done. And even the nature of her work, right? The sort of violence and self-violence in it. I'm curious too, that for the listeners who haven't read the book yet, and you should be reading it, promptly buy it immediately after this interview. There we get to see through, well, both Kate's, I guess, understanding and sort of knowing Miranda's work, but also of course through the actual documents, we see some of the work that Miranda is known for, right? Specifically, is it an exhibit or exhibition? I never know with photography. It's
I think exhibition would be more like an event that has like multiple. So like her capillaries, which might be what you're talking about, is like her first exhibition is like very successful.
Yeah, yeah. How did you tell me about? I'm just so intrigued and fascinated and like delighted that you were able to basically create a whole fictional oeuvre of a fictional artist, right? Like I actually felt like I was seeing these things that were in a museum, and it's not like you just created one picture. It's like you completely embodied this woman's life work over the period of her relatively short life. What was that like? How do you, and it's not even your medium, right? You're a writer, you're an author, so how did you create a complete oeuvre of a photographer of that renown?
I think I have quite a visual imagination, and so imagining the photographs or like what the photographs would theoretically communicate was not challenging. I don't think that I would be able to actually create that photograph, technically. And so one of also the great things about writing about art is that you can say like, basically like it's great art, like everybody's awestruck by it without actually having to like make the great object that's so striking. So, there's some like power there that like maybe I think in all likelihood if someone created some of these images they would not actually be like that amazing. But yeah, her work is really based on her specific work is not based on any one artist, but I wanted it to sort of fit into a particular school of art in like sort of 70s and 80s New York art scene. And so there was kind of like a style or approach to art that I wanted her to like go down. And then in terms of creating her overall sort of career, it was important to me that it was not like totally consistent, like a kind of one note thing, because I think that's not really how artists' careers evolve. Very often people will sort of swerve off, do like a different kind of topic or try out a different style. I do think like, looking back, I'm like, I wonder if her body of work was like cohesive enough the way I created it, but I wanted there to be like that kind of experimenting and trying out sort of new things. So, she goes from like these her first sort of like really successful series are these images of like women kind of in normal settings, but like just covered in blood. So they'll be like out to dinner and like kind of laughing and like having a conversation, but just like covered in blood, like kind of like Carrie style. And so, you know, and then she like later does like some like nature photography, but you know, the idea there is that there's this kind of, it's not just like, oh, pretty nature photography, it's like, oh, like what's the violence in nature or something like that. So basically like trying to keep these same thematic concerns as part of her work, while also thinking like, well, what would she want to experiment with trying, or how would be a different way that she could kind of express that thematic thing. I mean, again, it's much easier when you're writing like a few sentences about it than when you're like laboring for 4 years, like making the actual images.
The joys of being a writer, right? You get to create the art, but also create the art world and the like public reception, right? If only we could do this in a meta way for our own writing work. Carly, we're at 35, right? She's gone. She stopped listening to us.
She says yes in the chat.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll ask you a couple craft questions, and then I'll do a speed round, which will be speedy. Okay, so a couple of craft questions, because I'm always interested in hearing about other writers' craft. Structure, you've touched on the structure of this book emerging with these sort of two voices, right? I think it's brilliant, and it's something that I love about the book, and it feels so unique, both just the dual structure, but also the way that that Miranda's work comes out, right? I mean, receipts, photography, letters, just all sorts of diaries, you know, little notes. It sort of all comes together to create this voice for her, which I think is so well done. Were you just like hammering at this from different ways until you found that? Did that come early? How did you land there?
At like the different materials?
Yeah, that, but also Kate and Miranda as sort of the two people that hold this book together.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, very early on, I knew it was going to be like a story about, you know, a young woman kind of becoming obsessed with this, you know, past artist and trying to kind of like go through her archives and piece together a mystery that way. I've done a lot of work in archives for my academic work, and I just was, you know, really interested in kind of making that into almost like a detective experience and framing a mystery or a thriller that way. So that, yeah, I mean, that was always the structure. It, you know, just took some experimentation to get to the right pacing with like pacing the narratives, making it so that you didn't, you know, only want to read one character's narrative, and you were sort of equally interested in both of them. Theoretically, I'm sure a lot of people prefer one, but like, you know, that they both have the same narrative drive, and that, like, yeah, I mean, it just took a lot of kind of experimentation with pacing to get there in the end, but that format was consistent from the beginning.
And you've touched on research a good bit, and I'm always sort of amused by people who go, well, it's fiction, you don't have to do research, which, as we know, is not true. But I'm curious how your craft and the way you work as a writer is impacted by your time at Amherst as a student, your time at Penn, right, getting your PhD. I think that equips you particularly well for a book in which there is a lot of research, right, and that you're sort of reflecting the content is form and form is content, right? Kate is digging through all of these archives and having to piece together a narrative. But I'm curious how your work in academia has, I think, really just equipped you for doing this sort of book, but how do you feel that comes into play when you're writing?
I definitely think that there is that element of, like, you know, it just being a part of my background for a long time. Since Amherst, even a little before Amherst, because in my high school, we like started doing some like primary source research sort of stuff. So then, like, you know, I got to Amherst, and
are so happy that you took that. And probably most high school students are like, bleh, I'm so glad this is over. And then you came and built a foundation, use it as a foundation for writing this beautiful book.
I do. My high school teachers have been passing around a copy, which I think is really sweet. And
Oh, I love
they
it.
have a little like book club chain, which is really lovely. Um, yeah, and so at Amherst, I just was like really kind of dove into that and did a lot of primary source reading and in grad school as well, and just throughout, a lot of thoughts, I guess, about the sort of ethical stakes of it, the sort of experience of it, what happens when you're trying to kind of imagine someone else's story, usually someone that you will, by definition, never know personally. And so those interests sort of like generally coalesced in the book, as you say. In terms of like my own research for the book, definitely, I feel very able to locate a lot of different sources. And I think that Amherst gave me great training in the magic of JSTOR and Nexus Lexis and LexisNexis. Now I'm kidding. LexisNexis. Clearly, I remember it well.
Like Amherst College, I don't know, the home of great researchers since 2010. That's when you graduated, right?
Yes, yeah, and yeah, I imagine a lot of alumni listening to this now being like, ah, yes, LexisNexis was also my biggest takeaway from the college experience.
Love it. Love it. Okay, I have some speed round questions for you, in which actually Amherst has a co-star role, if you will,
Ooh.
in the parlance of Hollywood, where I live. Coffee or tea?
Coffee.
You have to say that because
Yes,
you're
my partner is like a specialty coffee expert and like literally works in specialty coffee. So naturally coffee.
right. He's gonna break up with if you say tea. Three things you have within reach while writing.
Water, a pen, my glasses.
Wait, does that mean you write freehand? I mean, you write by hand?
No. I don't write freehand, but I do, sometimes like if it's like a larger structural thing or something, I'll like sort of doodle or make a flow chart or something like that. So
I think glasses, I refuse to accept glasses as your third object because probably they're on your face.
they're all of my answers were kind of bad. I just am like, I do think that I'm like, well, whenever I'm writing, I'm just like at my computer, my physical self disappears. So I genuinely don't know if there's anything that I really insist on having with me when I'm writing other than my computer
That's
and
okay.
usually my glasses.
I've asked this doing other author interviews and like moderating events, and don't worry, no one's ever like a frog. Like I feel like that's a pretty standard: water, cup of tea, computer,
Yeah.
earbud, stress ball.
We're a varied species, us writers.
Yeah, right. Who would play? This is a bit of an insipid question. Sorry, all of you elitist Amherst types listening. Who would play Miranda Brand in the movie?
I really can't. I can't answer this question. I just don't know. I just don't like envision it at all. And I've gotten this question before, and I just don't have an answer.
Okay, I'll give mine. I actually don't know how to pronounce her name. She was in The Killing. She's the detective Mireille Enos, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, she's my pick. She's probably a little old now, but you know what?
I could see that. Yeah.
Right, because actually in The Killing she's obsessive, right? And it really her sort of own illness or sort of proclivities, certainly obsessive personality, become intertwined with the case, and I feel like that's exactly what happens in your book.
Yeah, that's a great answer. I don't think I would be a very good casting director, in general.
That's good that you don't have to be.
Well,
By the way, also I had not actually come in. Mireille Enos like appeared to me in the moment I said it, so that wasn't even one I was sitting on. I was just like, that's it.
wow.
That's it. Hollywood, pay attention. See if she's available because
Amazing.
no one's filming anything. Okay, you have two adorable dogs. Which dog do you prefer nearby when you're drafting a novel?
Wilkie is my Chihuahua mix, and I love having him on my lap because he's very warm, especially in the winter, and very cozy. Max, who's our larger dog, really values his alone time, and he would probably get he's kind of a nervous dog, so he would kind of get nervous if forced to sit by me while writing the whole day.
I appreciate you consent. Consent is important even with
yeah.
animal.
Wilkie more than consents. Wilkie
Yeah, well,
is
he's like
devastated if he's not sitting on
110%
someone's lap. So.
presenter. Antonio's pizza flavor, favorite topic?
Oh, wow. I haven't thought about Antonio's in a long time. Okay, I feel like there was this really, this like, half of the, maybe 80% of people are going to think this is really gross, but I feel like there's this like pineapple and ham one that I really liked.
Why does everyone hate on pineapple and ham? I think it's a classic. It's a classic.
I understand why people think it's gross. I completely understand, but I just also like it. There's also one that was like a chicken tortilla or something, I think. Like it had like a nice little sauce and like crunchy pieces on that. I like, any toppings on anything that has a lot of texture. I really like that.
I love that you choose your pizza by texture. Okay, two
I
last
touch
questions.
it before I
Two
buy
last
it.
questions. Thing you miss most about Amherst College?
Oh, I mean, I think two things lately. One is just, my friends. I have like a very active, in addition to, texting you and Honora and other GADS people all the time, I have a very active, like WhatsApp thread with a lot of my Amherst friends that we're just like, it's like 300 messages a day. And I just am like, oh, I just wish I could give all those people a really big hug. They also don't live in LA, so I haven't seen them in an especially long time. And then, I've also really been lately just thinking really fondly about that lovely view over, like, from the quad over Memorial Hill. That's what it's called, right? Yes.
I think so.
Sledding. Yeah. So, yeah, those two, that view and friends. I mean, I'm also, I think it's the pandemic isolation. I'm just like, any
Right, I was
human
gonna say it's like
contact
even
would be great.
if we
Remember
all
when we
live
went to
in LA.
parties?
Oh yeah. Well, I was gonna say even if we are all in the same city as you couldn't actually hug any of us.
Yeah,
So.
exactly.
Okay, and last but certainly not least, what can we expect next from you? What are you working on? What's in the docket for Sara Sliger, author extraordinaire?
I'm working on my second book now. I'm not sure when it will be out. I would guess probably 2022. So I'm working on that. I've been working on a little screenwriting.
Ooh, didn't
Yeah,
know this.
I know. Well, yeah, you and I haven't spoken about it yet, but yeah, so I'm just sort of like playing around with some ideas there. But yeah, but probably the soonest I will be contributing something creative to society will be on my Instagram page, where I like to Photoshop pictures of my Chihuahua onto book covers. And I'm well overdue for one of those. So like that's probably gonna be my next published work of art.
Oh, amazing. Well, I'm going to have you give your Instagram info to listeners who might want to follow you, and we'll be there.
Yes, it's just my first name and last name, but I'll ask Carly to put it in the.
Okay, perfect. Yes, put it in the thing. Yeah, so Sara Sliger, find her on Instagram. You can buy Take Me Apart anywhere books are sold. There's also a fabulous audiobook with two narrators for Miranda's section and Kate's section, which are much beloved. They have their own followings, and people are just loving the audiobook as well. We always say support your indie bookstores, especially now because they are really struggling amidst COVID. I hope by the time this interview goes up, the pandemic is like a horrible nightmare that's in the past. But if it isn't,
I appreciate your optimism.
I know, right? Ha ha ha. Yeah. So go out and buy Sara's book. Buy multiple copies. I've been giving it as gifts to people, and they are loving it. So support Sara's work. And
another great book that you could buy is Heart of Thorns or Tears of Frost by Bree Barton, both of which are widely available. I would start with Heart of Thorns because it's the first in the trilogy, but I think that if you started with Tears of Frost, you could probably figure out what happened in Heart of Thorns. I think
it's a better book. It's like it went darker, and I think darker is often more interesting, right? Which I think, yeah. I don't know. You got there in darker on the first try, but we can't all be Sara Sliger.
You can't all have a really horrific imagination.
I know, violent, bloody, nightmarish books. Cool. Well, thank you so much. This has been a blast, and thank you everyone for listening. We have so enjoyed getting to chat books and violence and small Chihuahua dogs and wildfires.
Awesome. Thank you, Bree.
Thank you, Sara.